Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And the way we're doing this is we're going through chronologically through the Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we're looking at them in order to get a better picture of the whole story. And so I just highly recommend, if you haven't, if maybe this is your first time seeing one of those, or you only seen a couple, you can start at the beginning if you want to. You can start here. It just makes sense however you want to do it. But what we're trying to do is just put the story together a little bit better, and dive a little bit deeper into each little bit section of scripture, with some bullet points where you have a study guide you can follow along with. There's a link in the description for you to sign up for that. And so, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do so, because we're going to continue to put these out and publish these different studies, and we're going to do deeper dives into studies as well. And so we're looking at Jesus feeding the 5,000. If you watched yesterday's video, it was John, or the last 2 days, it was John the Baptist, and then Herod thinking John the Baptist had come back from the dead. And so Jesus now, at the start of this, finds out, here's the news about John the Baptist. He knows John the Baptist has been killed by Herod. And so he leaves in a boat. He leaves in a boat to be alone. He wants to go to a remote area and be by himself, but the crowds follow him. And because they wanted to be healed, there's a lot of he had a large following because of the things he could do and who he was and what he taught. And so the crowds followed him. They came to him, still followed him and found him. And so at that in the evening time, usually he would dismiss them, or they would be dismissed, and Jesus was like, these apostles were like, hey, they need to be dismissed, they need to go get food. And Jesus like, you feed them. And they're like, well, we can't feed them, and then they look around, and all they've got is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And so Jesus says, bring him here. He has them sit down on the grass. He takes the loaves and the fish, and he blesses them, and he starts to pass it out, and everyone ate. Right, everyone ate. And then when they were done, they picked up 12 baskets of leftover food. And so, and Matthew records that there were about 5,000 men. This is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. One of the few stories that are actually in all 4 of the Gospels. A lot of them they parallel. You'll have one or two, or but usually, to see all 4 is not as much. But Matthew records that there were 5,000 men who were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children, and we'll look at that. And so Jesus feeds at least 5,000 people. It was another miracle, with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And so I want to go back to the beginning here, and I want to look at and start with the fact that we see that Jesus sought solitude after the news of John's death, right? He still had that human, he was fully human, fully God. And so he had that human connection, and he had lost a good friend, someone who had, one that was a great prophet. And so he went to be alone, so that way he could deal with his grief, and that's a good thing to do. We need to do that. We need to make sure. One of the things I'm going to continue to cover here, we're going to start seeing this pattern of Jesus seeking solitude, seeking to be by himself, to be alone, to pray, to do this thing. And we need to make sure we are doing that on a regular basis, because we need to get alone and have alone time with God. And so Jesus tried to slip away from the crowds, but they found out, right? They found out where he was. And so since they did, they were following him. And here's the thing, this is I think the important thing, the difference between how we are as humans, and how God, or how Jesus was as humans, right? Instead of getting impatient, look, if I try to get away, if a friend of mine had just died, and I was trying to get away and be alone, and a huge crowd of people were trying to bug me, I wouldn't be very patient. I can just tell you that I wouldn't be. But Jesus was, he welcomed the people, and he ministered to their needs, because that's what he was here to do. And he didn't dwell on his grief, but he returned to the ministry that he came to do. And so we see that, and we've got to try to make sure that we do that. Yes, we do need to get away. We do need to have that alone time, that self-reflection time to grieve sometimes, time to mourn sometimes, right? And maybe sometimes just to take a deep breath. But we need to make sure we get back to the ministry that we're called to do. And so, a lot of times Jesus performed miracles and signs to prove, or to show signs of his identity. But here, right, he read that we read he healed people because he had compassion on them, right? I forget which one that was in. I don't think it was in Matthew, but I know it was in one of the other gospels. But a lot of times Jesus was doing miracles to show signs of his identity, and that was part of it. But this one specifically records that, hey, he felt compassion on them, and so that's why he was doing it. He wasn't trying to prove anything to them. He just felt bad for them. And it shows that Jesus is loving and caring and a very feeling person. I mean, the fact that he wanted to get away and grieve whenever after John had died, right? He sees these people and he feels bad for. He doesn't get mad that they're coming after him when he's trying to mourn. He doesn't any of that. He feels bad for them, and he sees that they have needs that he can meet, and he wants to meet those needs. And so Jesus then asked the disciples, and gets into the evening time, and he asked the disciples to provide food for over 5,000 people. We're gonna look at the number thing here in a minute. They were amazed and said it was a small fortune, right? So it's like it's going to be a small fortune to do this, right? To feed all these people. Like, where are we going to get all this money? And so the note that I want to put is how do we react when we're given an impossible task by God, right? Or something that seems impossible. Well, it's like, well, I can't do that. All right. I can't do that. And this is where Jesus calls us to do things all the time that we don't think we can do, but that through him, right? And if we have faith in him, we can do those things. And that's how the apostles were here. A situation that seems impossible with human resources is simply an opportunity for God. And we need to remember that, right? That things, when we see things and we think they're impossible, they're not always impossible, and it's an opportunity for us to prove our faith, for God to prove himself. And so we need to look at that. So Jesus then takes and multiplies 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed over 5,000 people. The text here states, at the end of Matthew, it states that there were 5,000 men present besides the women and children. So more than likely, the total that Jesus fed was more than 5,000 people, right? And it could have been up to 10 to 15,000, because if you think, a lot of people would have been families that would have fallen, been wives and husbands, and those things. And the number of men is listed separately because in Jewish culture of that day, that's how things were recorded. Men and women usually ate separately when in public. And so the children then would eat with the women. That's how they would record things. They would record things with a number of men, and that's how that would, that's why that's translated that way. And so more than likely, there's a very good possibility that Jesus fed upwards of 10 to 15,000 people that day. And so, feeding 5,000 people was a miracle with what he had. Feeding 15 was even more of a miracle in the fact that, we look and they had 12 baskets of food left over. And so that's awesome to see that. And so the question is, why did Jesus bother to feed these people? Right? He wasn't there to, he's there to establish his kingdom. He's here to die on a cross. Why is it he's here to teach and preach of what's coming? Why did he bother with feeding them? Right? He could have easily sent them away. It's like, look, I'm too busy to feed you. Go, go get your food and come back. And he could have done that. But the thing is, and we need to pay attention to this, because Jesus does not ignore the needs of people. He doesn't. And if you look at almost every single story, right, that we see in Jesus's interaction with people, he meets their physical needs before he meets their spiritual needs. Almost every single time. He does something for them for physical, either well-being, healing, whatever, and then he switches to the spiritual. And I think honestly, I think, one of the things I do when I study the New Testament, and I've tried to do, because I know in the past I didn't practice this, is I tried very hard to study and dig deeper into how Jesus ministered to people, because that's to be our example. That's the gold standard for how we are to evangelize and treat people and reach out to people. And Jesus always reached out to help a physical need first. I say always, most of the time. You see him, he was healing someone, he was feeding someone, he was helping them with a physical issue that they had. He met them there first, and then hit the spiritual. And I believe this is a true example of the best way to reach someone is if they're going through someone, especially someone who's going through something physical that they, or something they're struggling with. You meet that need first, and then you have an open invitation, or an invitation then to discuss or talk about the spiritual. If you just goes to someone straight to the spiritual, most people are going to cut you off. They're going to stop right there. And so, he's concerned. He's concerned about our every aspect of our lives, the physical and the spiritual. And we might ask, as a church, right? Have we taken this command too lightly? Of you feed them, right? He says you feed them. He told the apostles, you feed them. We were, one time we were doing events and planning events for a church before, and the discussion would come up, and I've heard people say, well, we don't need to feed these people. It's like, it was just a negative connotation around feeding people. Oh, they're just here to get the food. What if they are? What if the only reason they ever come to a church or interact with Christians is because those Christians are offering them free food? What do you have then? You have an opportunity to speak into their life spiritually. And so we need to make sure that, maybe we need to be feeding a whole lot more people. Maybe some of the main, focuses, maybe some of the main ministries of the church should be feeding and healing people. What if that was our main focus? Was feeding and healing people so that we had an opportunity to speak into spiritual needs? I don't know. What if that's what we spent most of our resources on? I don't know. I see that, and I think of that, and it's like, hey, maybe Jesus has a point there. Maybe Jesus' example of how he evangelized, how he taught, how he reached people, maybe that's the perfect example of how we should be. And so, you know, there are a lot of churches out there that do a lot of really good things, but in the context of the Christian world today, I do think we've lost our way a little bit. We don't have as much compassion. We don't have as much compassion as we see. There's a little bit of cynicism. There's a little bit of like that. Like I said, we don't need to be feeding these people. We don't, because they're just taking advantage of us. So what? Let them take advantage of you, right? Let them come, because in the fact that they're men, let people come and take advantage of you, because not all of them are going to be taking advantage of you, and you always have the opportunity to reach someone because of that, right? And so, anyways, it's a little tangent of mine, because I do think this is a very important ministry tool that we can use, that we see Jesus use to meet the physical needs of people, right? And so it's impossible to minister effectively to the spiritual need without considering the physical need. And I would take that further, and I think it's almost impossible to reach the spiritual need without reaching or hitting a physical need first, right? Now, there are some people who come to you who have hit rock bottom, and they are there because they know that they're just spiritually dead, and it's like they need something, and they know it, But I'll be honest with you, I think those are few compared to the number of people out there, and especially today, of people who are out there who they just need someone to be there for them, whether it's emotionally or physically or mentally. There's a lot of mental health stuff going on. The church has the perfect opportunity right now to meet people through a mental health situation and in mental health areas. And so I go to say all that too. This Jesus feeding the 5,000. A lot of times the main focus is, oh, well, Jesus performed this miracle. Yes, he did. It was awesome. It's a huge miracle. But I think we missed one of the big points in this, is that Jesus was making sure to meet the needs of people, especially physical. We see this with he had compassion on them because they were struggling, right? And so he loved on them. He cared for them. He healed them. And then he's like, hey, they're hungry. I'm going to feed them as well. And so we need to duplicate that from a Christian standpoint, right? We can't turn that little bit of food into enough to feed 15,000, but we can, and a lot of us do have the resources to feed 15,000, and most of us don't need to feed it. Most churches, right, they just need to feed a few people, a lot of times, just a handful, maybe less than 100. And they could reach and make a huge difference in people's lives. And that's where we need to be. And so I hope that's a little bit, maybe a different perspective on, the story of just seeing that, oh wow, Jesus performed the miracle, but look at what was behind that miracle and why. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching these. I hope they're useful. I hope you learn from them. I hope it's something that you can apply. If they are, please share it if you think it'd be helpful for someone else. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. We're going to continue to produce videos, push out videos. Some of them go deep, some of them not so much, just because there's not as much meat there. But we try to cover at least 5, 10, 15 minutes in each one of these. And as always, I appreciate everyone who watches.